light off. I had it on because I thought it might show the quilting, but really it's just a big old distraction. So let's turn that off. It's funny on YouTube, you can't kind of see what it's going to look like before you end up here live. So here we are. I'm Susan Smith. Good morning. Well, at least it's morning in my part of the world in the inland Northwest. We're in my studio, Stitched by Susan. You're seeing my long arm Stella over my shoulder here. And I've been coming on live every morning in April, and I'm going to try and do it for the whole month. And a few of you have been graciously giving me questions and topics. I have some lined up for next week, specific topics leading up to a free workshop that I'm offering. But I'm open to talking about pretty well anything because I'm kind of about reality. So you're in my studio, you are seeing a loaded quilt. I can't get the camera far enough away for you to hear my voice and see the whole thing, but I loaded this up last night. It is 108 inches square. So king size and then some. I've done king size quilts before. I have a 12-foot frame, which is not the largest. They also come 13 in the Bernina brand. But the other ones that I've done have been slightly longer in one direction than the other. So I loaded, the narrower side up and down and the length going down to the bottom, but this one is square. So I had no options. So my long arm rails are full to the brim this morning. Let's just see. I'm having difficulty this morning with comments too. Okay, here we are. Good morning from windy Albuquerque, from Jamaica. Awesome. Tampa, Florida, Houston, Texas. Shelby, good morning. Cindy, good morning. Alton, Illinois. Estelle, Lydia, Linda Lockyer in Regina, Saskatchewan. Lauren in Seneca, Illinois. Karen Moore in South Africa. So awesome. So this morning, I happened to have a really great object lesson that I thought I would share with you. Again, I'm all about being real, right? So I got this quilt loaded. It is all batiks on the front and the backing is batik as well, which can sometimes pose a bit of a problem. Batik fabrics, something about the weave and the thread quality makes them just a little bit touchy. So when I started stitching, when I went to pull up my bobbin thread the first time this morning, I could feel, you know how you hang onto the bobbin thread, you drop the needle thread, and it grabs that one bobbin thread and pulls it up. Well, I could feel this little kind of tug resistance when it pulled it up. And right away, I know to pay attention when it doesn't feel right. So I thought, it's not quite right. Rethreaded the bobbin, tried all the things, and it still didn't feel quite right, but I did persist in basting because it's very slow, right? It's almost one stitch at a time. So I basted, the up the left, across the top, and down the right of my quilt. And then it was feeling better. It seemed to be stitching okay. So I launched into the first swirl of my quilting design, and you could see the top thread was pulling tight. Visibly, it was pulling tight. So again, I know, don't just power through that. Just stop and figure out what's wrong, right? It takes less time than messing with it after you've done a whole bunch of quilting and have to undo it. So at that point, I started running down through my checklist, and I promised you guys I would show you exactly what I did. And I made a list of all the steps I took to check the bobbin this morning until I finally got it resolved. And I don't know if this is going to make you feel good or bad because there's a lot of steps. They're simple, but I found what I have sometimes found before is that I don't actually figure out what the problem is. I just keep trying things, trying things until it works. And sometimes maybe it's a combination, and that's why I can't narrow it down to one, but that's kind of how today was. Nevertheless, here's how I approached it. I had already rethreaded my bobbin once, as I told you when I first pulled up that bobbin thread. That didn't seem to fix it, so now I pulled the bobbin out again. I unspooled a couple of feet of thread off of it just in case it was maybe overfilled, right? Because that can prove an issue. Threaded it back in, loaded it up again. Nope, same problem. So let me just refer to my list here. I did get out my Bernina gauge. I couldn't remember, honestly, if I had checked that bobbin when I wound it. So I got out my trusty gauge, which if you have a TOA gauge, it's exactly the same. This is just Bernina branded. So it has, you load your bobbin into it in case you haven't used one before. You run your thread around the little pulley system, and then you pull thread through. And it gives you, there's a little measurement, a tension wheel that gives you a numerical measurement of your tension. So it's very precise. So I ran it through that, spot on. Okay, so that's not the problem. So then loaded my bobbin again, tried again, still not fixed. Then I went and got a bobbin that has a different thread. So I had 40 weight isocord thread loaded in my machine, both top and bottom. So I went and got my deco bob that I've been using, which is an 80 weight, and I loaded this bobbin. And by this time, I had gone and gotten a little practice swatch of fabric and just put it on the edge of the quilt. I don't think you can see it, but it's at that end. You know, you have a little bit of backing and a little bit of batting there. So I just put a fabric swatch on there, and this is where I'm doing my testing now. So I loaded my 80 weight bobbin thread and tried that out. Well, the stitching looked okay, but I was still hearing that little catch when it was, when the thread's going around the bobbin, and it's catching. It's not quite right. Okay, what did I do now? I went back to my real bobbin, checked the tension gauge again, still good. So now I put in a new needle. I did use the same size of needle. I had already concluded what I wanted. I have a 90-14 in it. So I put a new needle in. I put in a drop of oil because I had not done that since last night. I was quilting yesterday evening, so I thought, maybe. So I put one drop of oil in, which is our oiling sequence for the Benina is one drop on a particular hook in the bobbin casing. And then it is still happening. So here's the tricky bit. I'm listening, and the catch is in the bobbin thread when I'm holding it. That's where I'm feeling that little catch. But I thought to myself, well, I've tried and tried and tried the bobbin, and that's not fixing it. So maybe it is the top. A Bernina is a little different from other long arms in that it has a presser foot, more like a sewing machine. So when that presser foot is up, the thread is not in the tension discs and pulls through freely. So I had already pulled that thread through, and it's pulling just fine. So I thought it's okay, but I'm down to grasping at straws here, right? So I did snip the thread, pull it through the needle, and then from the very top, I rethreaded my machine with my top thread. And presto, that seemed to fix it. So whether it was that last tension check on the bobbin, or whether it was the new needle or whether it was the top thread, I'm unsure. But that did fix it. And Stella is now stitching like a champ. The long arm is named Stella, by the way. So that was great. That was very rewarding. But I just thought I'd share it because I think in my experience anyway, long arm quilting, that is the single most frustrating thing is when your stitches aren't forming right and you can't figure out what it is. And you try this and you try that and you try the other. And honestly, I didn't try that many things this morning. I've had worse days before, but just that is always the process. So I kind of have a mental checklist, and I think I've got a cheat sheet on Pinterest, on my Pinterest board too, with checkpoints of things to look for. And I always start with the easy ones like the bobbin tension and rethreading, and then go on to the more difficult ones like, are there thread burrs in any of your thread holders and things like that. But it is just an elimination process. And I don't know of a shortcut or a magic fix other than just trying, 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 trying. And what's funny is sometimes you can try the same thing repeatedly, and the third or fourth time it'll work like a charm. And I mean, our machines are mechanical, so it is something, but you can't always identify just what it is. I had threaded my machine fresh this morning, both top and bottom, so that didn't seem likely, but it clearly was. Something was amiss. So it's fixed. I'm up and running. So I'm going to look at comments again. I would love to know if some of you have got other quick tricks, kind of your go-to checklist for tension issues too. Lydia in Connecticut, love your live videos. Cindy in Iowa, I too do many large quilts like that. Rebecca, good morning from the Kitsap Peninsula. Cassandra, South Texas. Good morning, good morning. Mary in Australia, 12:30 a.m. Thanks for staying up late with us. Gosh. New Mexico, Alberta. Oh, look, Liz Smith. Hi from New Mexico. I'm making that quilt. Great. So you recognize it. The lady who made it is a longtime client, and oh my goodness, she does beautiful piecing. Her quilts are just always treasures, but she does not usually do quilts that are this large. Okay, the comments keep going to sleep. When I take my thumb off the screen, they all disappear. London, Ontario. I just purchased a TOA and trying to figure it out. Barbara, your best bet probably is to go on YouTube. I haven't made a video yet of specifically using it and what to look for, but they are a great tool. And, a lot of long arm quilters have done the the bobbin drop in their hand. And I did that for years and hundreds of quilts too. But the Toa or Bernina gauge are a bit more precise, so they can be helpful in that way. Esther, tension is the most frustrating part. Yes, all these suggestions are good. Good process to eliminate. That's exactly it. Julianne, I check for a tiny bit of lint in the bobbin case. That's a really good tip. I know I had just cleaned mine yesterday, and most bobbin cases have a little spring inside. And you're exactly right. Even the littlest bit of lint or thread fibers in there can mess with the tension. So it's worthwhile cleaning that out on a regular basis too. So yes, great tip. Karen, do you use a magnet to set your needle into position? You know, Karen, I used to on my Gamel, but now excuse me, I'm using a Bernina. Excuse me. And the Bernina needles are just the same needles as you use in your domestic sewing machine. So they have the flat back. So there's not any two ways. There's no adjustment. There's one way to load them and one way only. Esther is saying changing the needle often solves it for me. Yes. And you know, again, I had put in a new one yesterday, but in fact, I have done two small quilts betwixt and between. And as I mentioned at the beginning, the batik fabrics are often just a little tricky. So fresh needle at the beginning clearly is a good idea. And I guarantee you when this quilt is finished, maybe even halfway through this quilt, I'll be changing out that needle again. Joy, do you keep different bobbin cases for different tension or do you just adjust the bobbin? I just adjust the bobbin. What I do, I don't use a ton of different threads. That's just my personal preference. But I use the Isacord 40 weight mostly on the top. And then I have the Deco Bob, which is an 80 weight. And the other day I used a 100 weight actually in the top on a quilt that I didn't want the thread to show. So I do just adjust it as I go. But what I also do is on my cone of thread, because it's usually white, I write on the bottom side of it what my best tension is that I have found so far for that thread weight, and that helps me narrow it down. Again, with the Bernina, even on the top thread of the machine, it is a numerical number. It's not just a dial that turn 5 minutes or whatever. It is a numerical number. So I can jot that number on my cone of thread and always have a starting point. Isacord for me is 4.0. So boom, I'm right there. I can start at 4. And maybe depending if my bobbin has changed, I might need to adjust that a little, but 4 is always my starting point. Esther, good job to stick with it with the batiks. I don't often sew with batiks because I know the frustration of quilting them. I don't typically either for my own. They're just not my personal taste, but I do get quite a few client quilts that are batik, and this one is very beautiful. By the way, I put the little thumbnail for this live. I showed a bit of the fabric in it too because you could see the roses in it. So that's what I chose for a quilting design. I am doing this quilt entirely freehand, but I do these kind of whimsical, much like the ones in the fabric, kind of soft and not very structured roses. So I'm quilting roses and leaves all over this quilt. So that's the plan for today. Um, before I get into that, what my day holds actually is running our son to have his wisdom teeth out. Poor lad, he's turning 26 today, and for his birthday, he gets to go have his wisdom teeth pulled. Yay. So that's the tension headache, all better for today. Thanks for sticking with me. I see that there are lots of you watching, and I appreciate that. Before I go, I want to be sure to invite you, number one, to like and subscribe to my YouTube channel. I am a reality gal, so a lot of my episodes and things that I share have to do with practical stuff. I'm pretty real in my quilting studio. So like and subscribe and click the little bell and you'll get notifications when I'm going live. I'm trying to go live every day for the month of April, and it is not always at the same time though. So you'll want that notification on so that YouTube tells you when I'm coming live. And I do try to set them up a little bit in advance, at least 10 or 20 minutes, so you have a little bit of heads up. Anyway, wanted to invite you to a free workshop that I am hosting on the 15th of April. It's at 10 a.m. Pacific time, and it's called 5 Myths That Tie Freehand Quilters in Knots and How to Break Free of Them. It's my take on the most common objections that I hear among quilters, why they can't freehand quilt. I've always wanted to do that, but I could never. And I don't agree. I think you can. I think there are myths that are keeping you from trying it, and I want to bust those myths for you. I've broken through them myself. I can help you do it too. So there's a sign up link in the notes, the description right below this video. If you wanted to join that, you can register there, and then you'll get some emails leading up to it. There will be a workbook that you can print off if you'd like for notes, and some reminders of the time that it is and what all is included. So thanks so much for joining me today, and whatever you're doing today, I hope you enjoy it thoroughly, and I will see you tomorrow.